Have you ever felt like no one tells the truth about romantic love anymore? That every conversation is either blind idealization or bitter cynicism, never clarity, never honesty? Society idealizes love as pure, transcendent, and the ultimate fulfillment of human existence. But what if this image is a carefully crafted illusion? And what if one of history's most pessimistic philosophers saw through it over 2 centuries ago? Arthur Schopenhauer was not afraid to say what others wouldn't. He didn't hate love, but he didn't romanticize it either. While most thinkers of his time either worshipped love as divine or dismissed it as mere sentiment, Schopenhauer went deeper. He asked what lies beneath the surface, not what humans want love to be, but what it really is beneath the poetry, beneath the songs, beneath the cultural mythology we've built around it. He saw something uncomfortable, something few dare to confront even today, not because it's offensive but because it's true. Schopenhauer believed that the relationship between lovers was not built on spiritual connection nor conscious choice, but on biological deception, cosmic trickery, and the blind will to live. And the more you look around today at failed relationships, divorce statistics, and romantic disillusionment, the more his vision seems eerily accurate. This isn't a script about cynicism. It's not about dismissing human emotion or criticizing those who seek connection. It's about facing a deeper truth, one that reveals the hidden forces behind attraction, romantic suffering, and disappointment. Schopenhauer didn't offer answers wrapped in comfort. He offered something better, the chance to see clearly. So if you're tired of the lies, if you're willing to see beyond the romantic illusions and face the raw, unapologetic truth, then stay with me, because once you understand how Schopenhauer saw love, you may never look at relationships, desire, or happiness the same way again. Let's break it down. Schopenhauer believed that lovers do not truly love each other. They love an illusion created by nature, a carefully constructed trick that makes them feel chosen, special, even cosmically destined. He called this romantic intoxication a dangerous deception, one that says love is about individual happiness, personal fulfillment, and spiritual connection. But for Schopenhauer, this wasn't genuine connection. It was a form of cosmic fraud. To him, the ideal lover was not a reflection of authentic desire but a fantasy crafted by the species' will to reproduce. Instead of facing that biological reality, humans elevated love to poetry, to art, to divine intervention, and in doing so, they stripped themselves of rational agency and turned themselves into puppets in nature's grand reproductive drama. Schopenhauer found this not only dishonest but tragic. He argued that lovers lie to themselves because they cannot bear the full truth of what attraction is. Instinctive, predetermined, and driven by the species' continuation. Not better or worse than any other natural drive, but different. Mysterious not because it's transcendent but because humans choose not to understand. This mask of idealization, Schopenhauer believed, was not a sign of spiritual elevation but of nature's trickery that ensures reproduction through temporary madness. So when reality breaks through, when the intoxication fades and the real person emerges, lovers often feel betrayed, not because the other person changed, but because the illusion nature created couldn't hold. And Schopenhauer, always devoted to truth over comfort, saw this as one of existence's cruelest jokes, that to fall in love humans must first blind themselves to what love really is. Schopenhauer never saw love as a conscious choice. He saw it as the manifestation of a deeper force, the will to live. While individuals perceive their desires as personal and unique, Schopenhauer believed that romantic attraction had a more insidious form of control, not less powerful for being unconscious, just less visible. He saw this as a form of evolutionary strategy. Throughout human existence, individuals have believed themselves to be pursuing happiness through love, but they were merely being manipulated by the species' need to reproduce. So instead of being autonomous agents, they became vessels through which the will expressed itself, through attraction, through obsession, through sexual desire. And while humans constructed elaborate justifications with poetry and philosophy, the will shaped their choices without consultation. Schopenhauer noticed how lovers could sacrifice rationality without hesitation, compromise values without regret, and endure suffering without question. Their desires were instinctual, biological, and built on an agenda beyond their awareness. They felt unique attractions to specific individuals not out of spiritual recognition but genetic calculation. Not out of malice but survival. He didn't celebrate this, but he also warned against underestimating it, because while this kind of manipulation is harder to see, it's also harder to resist. Schopenhauer believed that humans had an illusion of choice, a way of thinking they were acting freely while being led by the nose. And in this sense, he saw them not as romantic heroes but as tragic figures within nature's plot. This wasn't misanthropy, It was simply stating what few dared to say out loud, that in the realm of love the most powerful force is the one we never consciously perceive. Schopenhauer believed that human beings are not driven by rational choice, they are driven by illusion, and in romantic love he saw this deception elevated to an art form, not out of human creativity but out of biological necessity. In a world where reproduction requires significant sacrifice, Schopenhauer believed humans learned to perceive beauty, charm, and compatibility where mere genetic compatibility existed. He didn't accuse lovers of being shallow. In fact, he viewed them as victims of a process beyond their control, navigating a hostile universe by mistaking reproductive strategy for transcendent connection. While most people confuse their attractions with free choice, Schopenhauer argued that lovers are simply responding to unconscious signals instinctively. They know the attraction is not rational, and yet they also know the feeling matters more than reason. To Schopenhauer, the way lovers perceive each other is not genuine insight, it is biological programming. Their perception of beauty, their sense of destiny, their overwhelming certainty, these are not reflections of truth but weapons in nature's arsenal, ensuring that humans reproduce despite the suffering it brings. And while many dismissed this as mere cynicism, Schopenhauer saw it as profound existential insight. Lovers, he believed, have an intuitive grasp of their own manipulation but suppress this knowledge. They understand that people don't fall in love with reality, they fall in love with what biology needs reality to be. And by surrendering to how they perceive their beloved, they don't just react to desire, they fulfill the species' agenda. This is why Schopenhauer believed the question of choice is never simple when it comes to romantic attraction. Because in a world where biological imperatives govern perception, the will to reproduce becomes more important than individual happiness. Humans, through centuries of cultural mythology, elevate this into a noble pursuit, rarely recognizing it for what it truly is: a quiet, persistent deception that sacrifices individual happiness for species continuation. Schopenhauer did not see love as a path to fulfillment. He saw it as a battlefield, two deceived individuals clashing beneath the illusion of unity, destined for disappointment by design. Men and women, in his view, were not joining in harmony but being forced together by a will that cared nothing for their happiness, only for reproduction and the continuation of suffering. They desired each other, yes, but for entirely unconscious reasons, and that unconsciousness created inevitable disillusionment disguised as destiny. He believed that lovers were drawn together by the will's calculations, projecting perfection onto each other, expecting salvation, completion, and eternal satisfaction. But after reproduction, the will's true aim was secured, this intoxication faded, leaving two strangers staring at each other, wondering what happened to the divine connection they once felt. These were not conscious deceptions, Schopenhauer argued, but instinctive ones driven by biology, culture, and the unrelenting will to live. What disturbed him most was the repetitive nature of it all. Society dressed up this tragedy in poetry and promises, calling it love, but beneath that softness, Schopenhauer saw endless cycles of desire, fulfillment, and disappointment. He saw two beings using each other, being used by nature, attempting to find meaning under the pretense of connection. In this sense, love was not the solution to human loneliness, it was its most seductive trap. Schopenhauer didn't blame individuals for this, nor did he mock their suffering. He blamed the will itself, the driving force of existence that created the illusion that love was lasting, fulfilling, or free from inevitable disappointment. That he believed that every relationship contained the seeds of its own disillusionment, one that most people never acknowledged. And because they didn't see it, they suffered under it, again and again, generation after generation. For Schopenhauer, true understanding only begins when we stop pretending the disappointment isn't inevitable, when we stop expecting permanent satisfaction and begin accepting the raw, often brutal dynamics that shape human desire. Love, in his view, was not transcendence, it was temporary insanity. And like all such altered states, it came with a painful return to sobriety. Schopenhauer believed that morality was never objective, it was always a construction serving deeper forces. And when it came to love, he saw romantic morality not as a true ethical framework but as a form of social control serving reproduction. It wasn't about goodness, it was about continuation. He argued that humans didn't follow romantic ideals for their intrinsic value but for what these ideals facilitated: the perpetuation of life and suffering. In a world where rational beings might question the value of bringing new life into a painful existence, Schopenhauer believed romantic mythology created a framework where reproduction was not just accepted but celebrated. By elevating values like fidelity, sacrifice, and unconditional love, society created a system where reproductive partnerships were praised, not because they led to happiness but because they ensured new generations of sufferers. The moral language of love became a way to dignify a process that, viewed rationally, might otherwise be rejected. Schopenhauer didn't see this as conscious conspiracy. He saw it as the will's brilliance, a quiet subversion of rational thought using the language of virtue. Society, eager to continue despite the suffering inherent in existence, accepted romantic mythology without question. But his view was not merely cynical. He believed that beneath this surface of virtue lay a deeper instinct. An instinct for perpetuation without consideration of consequences. When lovers spoke of destiny, he heard biology. When they invoked eternal love, he saw temporary madness, not out of malice but necessity. To Schopenhauer, the romantic posture was never innocent. It was strategic, and in humans shaped for centuries by cultural narratives, it became a way of navigating an irrational drive without ever appearing to surrender reason. Not with logical arguments but with poetry, vows, and rituals, a silently enforced morality that ensured reproduction without ever revealing the emptiness that would follow. Schopenhauer lived in a time when marriages were often practical arrangements, when romantic love was still more ideal than requirement. But even then he saw the suffering intensifying. He saw the early signs of a shift, society beginning to base partnerships on romantic love rather than practical considerations, elevating temporary insanity to the central organizing principle of human bonding. And he wasn't optimistic, he was alarmed. He believed that love's deceptions had always been powerful, but as society removed the guardrails of tradition and arrangement, those deceptions would only grow more destructive. For centuries, the suffering caused by romantic disillusionment was contained by social structures, by economic necessity, by limited expectations. But what happens when those structures dissolve? What happens when humans begin to expect love to provide not just reproduction but personal fulfillment, metaphysical meaning, and lifelong satisfaction? Schopenhauer feared that the rise of love-based marriage would intensify human suffering, not because he thought love was insignificant but because he believed most humans weren't equipped to see through its deceptions. The average person, raised on fairy tales and romantic ideals, would feel deeply betrayed by love's inevitable disappointments when they had been promised transcendent completion. And that betrayal would not manifest as understanding, it would manifest as despair. This wasn't misanthropy, it was prediction. Schopenhauer knew that a society organized around romantic love would become a landscape of disillusionment, no longer protected by the modest expectations of practical partnership. Each person would become exposed to the full force of love's temporary madness and its inevitable sobriety. And that kind of disappointment, Schopenhauer believed, would devastate a world built on romantic promises. He didn't write this as celebration or condemnation. He wrote it as a warning that the future would not be shaped by increased happiness but by intensified disappointment. The rise of love as life's central meaning wouldn't create fulfillment. It would provoke confusion, resentment, and a painful redefinition of expectations. Because when humans mistake a biological impulse for metaphysical completion, the old world of modest contentment gives way to a new world of magnificent disappointment. Schopenhauer didn't write about love to crush human spirits. He wrote to strip away illusion because for him, truth was sacred even when it was brutal. But what many misunderstand is that his philosophy wasn't rooted in nihilism. It was rooted in liberation. And in that liberation he saw a possibility beyond the endless cycles of desire, fulfillment, and disappointment. He saw the chance for something higher. Schopenhauer believed that most relationships were built on mutual deception, each projecting fantasies, each hiding reality, each attempting to extract happiness from a process designed for reproduction, not fulfillment. But what happens when both sides drop the masks? When individuals no longer expect eternal satisfaction and partners no longer promise cosmic completion? When neither seeks to use love as an escape from existential emptiness but instead stands in full awareness of what love actually is and what it cannot provide? This, Schopenhauer suggested, was rare but not impossible. It required the death of romantic mythology, the rejection of love as salvation, and the courage to meet each other not as solutions to existential problems but as fellow travelers in a difficult existence, equal in delusion, equal in suffering, and equal in potential clarity. To reach this point, one must abandon expectation. The lover must let go of the demand that the beloved provide what no human can give. The beloved must let go of the burden of being someone's everything. Only then can something more authentic emerge. Not a triumph over existence but a clear-eyed companionship within it. Schopenhauer didn't promise this was easy. He knew most would never reach it. But for those who could, those willing to abandon romantic intoxication for existential sobriety, a new kind of relationship could form, one not based on illusion or desperate need, but on shared understanding of life's inherent limitations and quiet moments of genuine compassion in the face of universal suffering.